Hello, Sirus from Sirus Gaming Spot here, and welcome to Sirus Gaming Corner, a gaming podcast where I and Surfers1390 talk about various gaming topics. From new games to old games, everything is fair game. So how's your evening going so far, Sword?
Good, always good to be back on.
For today's episode, we're going to talk about the two combat systems that mostly occupies most RPGs.
That is say, we're going to talk about turn-based combat systems and action combat systems. And basically talk about what we think of them. I guess we should define what a turn-based combat system is, huh?
Yeah, lay down the groundwork.
So a turn-based combat system is just really a combat system where characters take turns in a matter. And where you control every character and then you dictate what they do within their turn. And stuff like that.
Yeah, you'll scroll through a menu, click your actions, depending on the game. Sometimes it'll show you the turn list of who's going to go when, etc., etc.
And in an action combat system, you basically just fight in real time, doing attacks in real time. Just like the bare minimum, I think, of those two combat systems, distilled in its basis concepts, I think.
Yeah, it's at its core, basically.
So, what do I think of turn-based combat systems? I say when they're done well, they're really fun. I'm gonna say something controversial here. It might be controversial. Just because you have a turn-based combat system doesn't mean that it's strategic.
Oh man, gotta ruffle some feathers.
It's just not.
Not by default.
Especially if all you're doing is hitting elemental weaknesses to simply do more damage to an enemy without it adding any nuances to the combat system. I mean, I guess you can somewhat call that strategic, but that's a really low bar, I think, at least for me.
Yeah, or if it's just as simple as, normal attacking a few times, healing when you need to, rinse and repeat. That's not strategy. Just because you're scrolling through a menu and taking your time doesn't mean you're exactly thinking deeply about your next move.
Now, can those elemental weaknesses turn the combat system into something more? Yeah. I mean, Persona is all about hitting elemental weaknesses, but that game, it works just because you're balancing between being able to keep doing it in order to get an auto attack, and then your goal is to try to kill them real quickly before they kill you. And it's made interesting because of the SP management of the dungeon crawling, because you have to make sure you balance between you don't overtax yourself, or you might just get a game over if you go too far when you don't have enough SP in a dungeon crawling in Persona.
Yeah, so a part of the strategy in that game, or in that series rather, comes from kind of outside combat when you're dungeon crawling. Like you said, SP management. You can't just spam your magic skills willy-nilly, because then you're just kind of shoot yourself in the foot, and then you're gonna have to exit the dungeon for the day. And that's the thing too, is I think if we're talking about strategy, I think the Persona games do that actually fairly well, because they give you advantages to exploiting elemental weaknesses. You'll get an extra turn, or in Persona 5 specifically, you could give that extra turn to another character. Mm-hmm. And there's actually a pretty good amount of thought that has to go into that game. So I think that's an example of having a turn-based RPG that actually does require some strategy to it.
Yeah. Then there's something in Final Fantasy 13, where you are trying to hit more weaknesses just to get their stagger bar up. But then you're trying to balance between building up to that stagger bar and then setting yourself up for a big attack, which makes it satisfying to do.
Yeah, okay, because that falls into the realm of active time battles, but that's still technically a form of turn-based. So I still think it counts. And yeah, you're juggling through all your paradigm sets, switching your job rolls on the fly, maintaining that stagger gauge, like you said. And that's the other thing too, that you can say we're about Final Fantasy 13, but I think that the combat is pretty unique, and I think that like you said, being able to stagger and like one of my favorite aspects is when you stagger an enemy, you can launch enemies into the air and juggle them in the air as long as they're staggered. Like, yeah, it's good stuff, and that's also another a good strategic element to it. I think one of my favorite turn-based combat systems lately is you play Trails of Cold Steel, right?
Yeah.
That's another one where like, I think there's a great mix of like you got to use your crafts and manage your CP to get it up, and then you can use your special attacks, your S crafts when that's at 100 or 200% depending on what it is. And there's like there's some kind of like strategy elements in it, in the sense that like placement is necessary. You know, you might be able to hit multiple enemies at once depending on where they are in the battlefield, and use like area of effect skills and things like that. So I think Trails of Cold Steel is a pretty good battle system in general, and that's like definitely another good turn-based combat system.
I'd probably say Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 have, like, they're really fun, but they're really exploitable as well.
Yeah. If you know what to do, if you could like create the right builds, they definitely can be.
Like, the name of the game is to not let the enemy have a turn.
Yeah, like use like Chrono Drive and things like that to up your agility and whatnot, and then then you're pretty much invincible.
An Arc Gale to like reduce enemies, delay their turns, and you keep doing that until they're basically dead. And, like, that game is interesting just because like there are exploitable stuff, but there's like a bunch of interesting options and tactics you can use on the game. I think like one of the strong points of turn-based combat systems is just like having how you can like get a good team synergy in. At least that's the appeal to me. Like building up your character and having each character be their own unique thing, and then thinking of ways to combine their abilities together in combat. And it works well in turn-based just because you can more easily manipulate how the action will play out just because it's turn-based. And when you actually are able to get the result you want, it feels satisfying. But I'm just saying that turn-based by itself isn't intrinsically strategic. But at least that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, it's like by by default, like it doesn't inherently like here's one I think a lot of people seem to praise is, we actually talked about this in like our very first episode, but with like Lost Odyssey, like I don't think there's nearly as much thought and depth as people make it out to be. Because it really is just like your basic, you know, attack, heal when you need to, hit an elemental weakness, and that's like kind of it. Like I'm not really thinking too hard.
Yeah. It's like hitting enemy weakness is fine and all, but I would like for, if you're going to make that your primary way of how to play the game, you like evolve that concept further, like how Persona did, or like make it towards your building like a certain playstyle or goal towards that combat system, like in Final Fantasy 13 where you're building up stagger bars. Or just like make the character building to be an integral part of the turn-based combat system, like in Trails of Cold Steel, or even like Final Fantasy 7 to a degree, where a good amount of fun of Final Fantasy 7 original combat system was the character building, and then implementing that character build into battle and seeing how well you're able to actually use it in battle.
Yeah, so it's like kind of like an extension of the combat system. Like they don't feel like segregated from each other. So how you build your characters is kind of how you function in combat, I guess, is the best way to put it.
But it also helps the Trails by itself as a pretty well-rounded combat system.
Yeah, like mechanically speaking.
Like in terms of how you manipulate the turn list, how they implement their special attacks, or the Mystic Arts version of the Trail series in there. How the craft system works, and how it works kind of like a materia system in terms of how crafts are like these magic abilities anybody can use. So you fine tune it to each character to where they are geared best, just because each character are pretty unique in themselves in Trails, in terms of each character being good or bad at certain tasks in battle.
Yeah, like they all have their own pros and cons. Like they're
Yeah.
useful in different ways.
And each character got their own specific skills too, to make them excel at what they do as well. So combine all that together makes a pretty comprehensive, fun combat system. So don't say that I hate turn-based combat systems. I don't. I just get really tired when people try to complain about real-time combat systems and say they're just button mashers, and say turn-based combat are so strategic when you get down to it. Some of them aren't. They're fun. I won't deny that they're fun, but in terms of overall strategy, there's like if they do have strategy, it's a pretty simple strategy.
Yeah, like it kind of boils. A lot of like encounters will kind of boil down to like repeating the same things a lot of the times. But like yeah, I still enjoy turn-based combat. It's like you said, like when it's done right. Like I like when it comes to turn-based combat, I like systems that are like have like intricacies to them. I'm really not a fan of like the like an extremely bare bones, scroll through a menu and just kind of do it like very. I'm not a fan of like the more traditional ones. I like when there's like nuances to it, like we just said with Trails of Cold Steel or Persona 4 and 5, whatever. I like when there's like more nuance to it. I think it keeps combat interesting when you have things like that.
Is there any other turn-based combat system we can talk about?
I mean, nothing that I can think of necessarily.
There are many ways I think you can make turn-based combat to feel unique, I think, within the genre. Because there's like traditional turn-based combat system where you just take turns. There are turn-based systems where there's a positioning system, like in Atelier Aisha. Like there's a positioning system in sorts, and there's like certain benefits to where you position your allies. There are ATB systems, which are kind of combination of real-time and turn-based combat system, but your turns is determined by an ATB bar, but you still have to take turns when ATB bar is up, and you can't do anything else besides taking that turn. Which is why we still define ATB as turn-based still, because you're still taking turns. It's just that the turn order is determined by the ATB bar, which fills in real time.
Right, exactly. Like everyone's still executing their actions one at a time in a turn-based fashion, so it still counts.
I like even something as simple as a turn order can change how you play the combat system as well. Because there are turn-based combat systems where each character have their own specific turns, which you have to take track of and manipulate, like in Final Fantasy X. And in the Atelier games does as well. I think Atelier, which was it? Which one's the third Dust game again?
Yeah, I don't even know.
Atelier Shally. There's mechanic in that game where if you do enough like damage to them, they'll get in the stun state. And if it lasts through, and if you time it right when it's their turn, they skip their turn, which makes it pretty satisfying. But it's pretty tricky to do in Atelier Shally, so yeah. And there are like also Trails Cold Steel. There are like tons of abilities and mechanics that allows you to manipulate the turn order. And then there are also games where where you and your enemy takes turn, like have like a player and enemy phase turn, where when it's your turn, all your allies attack, and when it's your enemy's turn, is your enemy attack.
Yeah, so it's like a player phase, enemy phase kind of thing. Yeah.
Like even like something as simple as a turn order can make a turn-based combat system feel incredibly unique too. The key to making a turn-based combat system interesting is, well, I think what I said before. Also, like, to at least make each turn-based, like what you're doing in a turn-based combat system to feel unique and interesting.
Yeah, like I said, it's like I think nuances are really essential to it. I think it can make a really unique and engaging combat system is when you have all these different like elements to them.
Because
and
I don't think just being a turn-based combat system is good enough to be interesting. You need to actually have a meaningful and interesting game plan to it, I think.
Because otherwise, I just think that the really traditional ones are kind of they're just kind of boring and they're very basic, and there's just not when there's not too much to it, it just makes the game not that enjoyable for me personally.
Yeah, like I think like I do like Final Fantasy VII. I do think the combat system can be a bit dull at times, just because you're the most you need to do is just like spam summon, and then you're done.
Pretty much, yeah, exactly.
And it doesn't help like there's not much unique character building in that game, since all the character doesn't really have their own type of abilities except for the limit breaks. So you're just building up like specific characters have certain materia, but you can just build up the same if you want. With there's like some penalty to that because some characters have specific stats they're more tailor suited to. But
but even then, I still feel like it's not the most. It's not like terribly consequential. You know, I mean, like for example, if you want to make Cloud a white mage, go for it. If you want to make Barret a black mage, go for it. You know, I mean, like every character is like basically a blank slate. Aside, like you said, aside from limit breaks. Which I mean, I could see why some people might like that level of customization. I think it boils down to preference, but I think that really at the end of the day, yeah, they're not like very interesting in terms of combat. Yeah. I think another good example is like Shadow Heart's Covenant. I think that's a really unique combat system with the Judgment Ring, and that game is a good combination of having like special ability like magic, for example, that all characters can use, and that while also still maintaining their own identity, and they also have their own pros and cons. Like Yuri has his fusion ability where he can turn to monsters. Blanca has like his spirit abilities, and then you can also give like universal magic spells to every character. And then the Judgment Ring makes for it's a lot more interactive, and you can customize your ring. And that's another one where there is actually a good amount of strategy, and I think that like Shadow Heart's Covenant and also its sequel from the New World in terms of combat are like really fun to play. They got a lot going for them mechanically.
But yeah, like, so, yeah, don't say I hate turn-based combat system, I don't. It's just that I'm not impressed by a game just because you have a turn-based combat system. And there are like some systems that I don't like, even if it is trying to do its own thing. Like, I've never gotten like fun out of the Bravery Default combat systems for myself. And like that's the system they also use for Octopath Traveler a bit.
Oh, did they in what's it called, in a Bravely Default? Because I only played Octopath Traveler. I didn't play Bravely Default. Are they similar?
Yeah, they're similar. In that you just basically sacrifice turns to get more turns later on.
Oh, I see. Okay. I think it's interesting in concept.
I never really had fun with it, but that's probably just a me thing. Rather than
I could see both sides of it.
Yeah. Like I think like the gameplay is still way too general when you do it like that.
But but overall it goes for both of us. Like I still enjoy turn-based combat systems when there's like nuance to it, because it's like, you know, like we both said, just because your game is turn-based does not mean it's strategic. It doesn't mean you're going to be racking your brain at every single encounter. You know what I mean? So it's
especially in like in traditional turn-based combat systems where you mostly just be fighting the same enemy type in a given area without really much change. So like I don't think you're supposed to be strategic in it. Not in the way as an actual strategy RPG, where like the terrain and where on the map does change how you go through an area. But I think like one of the main fans of traditional turn-based combat system is just like being able to plan out your plan of attack, and using what you have to make a specific game plan that's satisfying to do. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That pretty much took all the words out of my mouth.
And then real-time combat system. So, what do you think of real-time combat system, Sword?
Well, see, this is another thing. We mentioned this briefly for a second earlier, but there's another like misconception. Is like the same way everyone says that if it's RPG, if it's turn-based, it's strategic. Everyone says that, or not everyone, but a lot of people say if it's action, it's button mashing, and that's completely untrue. I've played plenty of action RPGs that are far more strategic than a lot of turn-based RPGs that I've played, like Tales Combat, for example. Like, not every one of them is perfect, but a very large number of them do require like they're a lot more skill based, obviously, but it's up to you as a player to master the mechanics. It's up to you to figure out like what kind of moves you want to do, how you want to set up your combos. It's up to you to and depending on the Tales game in question, there's other mechanics to keep in mind. Like a lot of them have over limits, mystic arts, etc., etc. There's a lot of nuance to it, and I've never understood that. Oh well, it's just a button masher. You button mash, you're gonna die. You can't play like Tales of Xillia 2, for example, and just mash X and think you're gonna get away with it. You're not. You got to understand the nuances of the combat. So, and that's just one example. There's like so many great ones, but that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't think that obviously there's some of them out there. Like there's for example, have you ever played Dot Hack, the original Dot Hack, like the Hack Infection?
No, I never played Dot Hack.
Well, basically, to summarize, those are button mashers. You are literally just smashing X over and over again and running away when you need to and healing when you need to. That's an example of a button masher. But like a Tales game or certain Star Ocean ones like Star Ocean 4 or whatever, there's way more nuance than people give them credit for. And I think that just because like an action RPG can and often are just as strategic as any turn-based RPG, that's how I feel about it anyway.
Yeah. Like when you get down to it, even the most basic like action RPG has as much strategy as the most basic turn-based RPG, which is keep attacking and use elemental weakness. Like just like turn-based combat systems, action RPG combats can make the hidden weaknesses to evolve into something. Like in Grace's F, if you like each enemy have a specific weakness, and there's like a reward for hitting all their weaknesses, which gets you to actually plan out what type of combos you're gonna do in order to maximize that benefit. And same with Xillia 2. Tales of Xillia 2 has a pretty nifty weakness system where if you hit an enemy with a weakness, they're stunned and you stun them. There's a certain amount of time that they're going to be stunned until you see like when you hit them with a weakness and it actually connects. You see this like circle around their model, and that's like the amount of time you can actually hit them until they get out of it. But then you can keep extending that combo if you hit them with another weakness, and so that extends the amount of time you can combo them further. So the plan of Xillia's 2 combat weakness system is to get that sweet threshold of keep landing attacks in order to do more damage, but also to just when the current weakness gauge is about to be off, you introduce another type of weakness to extend the combo even further. So you have this interesting game plan to do in an action combat system that utilizes the weakness system, which makes it interesting. And like action combat system can also be interesting in how they get you to encourage to play offensive or defensively. Like Grace's Elf is a great game that encourages offensive or defensive play, just with how it handles the CC system and how it handles sidestepping and dodging. And like there's like a lot of interesting game plans to do with an action RPG combat system, just with how a character plays like. Because how a character plays like, it can feel entirely different in terms of how they move, how they attack, what type of attack they have. Like one action RPG combat tier system can feel even more unique than a character you see in turn-based combat system. I think in terms of how they're played like and designed. I think.
Yeah, because when you get down to it, by default, like different party members in action RPGs will have their own fighting styles. You know, like you gotta learn a whole new moveset.
You like for a turn-based combat system, you don't have to learn like the most you need to learn is like it's done for a menu and then selecting the right type of attack. But in a real-time action combat system, not only do you need to know what attacks do which, also have to set them up the way you want to. You have to know the timing sometimes, because sometimes like doing this attack and combining with a certain other attack, it might not be the best thing. So like there's like nuances in an action RPG combat system when it's done well.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said before, like I like something like Xillia 2 or Grace's F. Those are just as, if not more, strategic than a lot of turn-based RPGs I've played, because of the intricacies of the combat, like the weakness system in Xillia 2. It's like Luger, especially. That's what makes him so interesting, is he has different weapon types to exploit those different weaknesses. So, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, just because I don't know what, yeah, I'm kind of stumbling over here, but yeah, just because it's action does not mean it's a button mash. You're not mindlessly hammering away at the X button, whatever the attack button is.
It's not just done in Tales, but Tales is probably the most de facto example we're going with, just because like I think Tales is like the perfect blend of action mechanics with RPG mechanics, just of how the games are designed. And,
they're like kind of my go-to whenever I like talk about this kind of thing. Tales is always the one that I default to.
I like
another one that I think no, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just gonna say, like, even Tales have interesting ways of how, even the TP management system is also interesting in how it changes from game to game, and how that TP management system can change how you play the game as well.
Like the traditional TP system
with normal attacks, like you just you try to balance between conserving your TP as well as doing cool shit, but then later on, you just do all you can just because you use food to store your TP. Why in like Tales of Grace itself and the other games who uses a much more interesting TP management system or like resource management system, like you can go all out, but then you also have to keep in mind of your defensive play, just because once you run out of your resource, because those resources that's connected to doing attack is generally connected to how you move around too, which does make make you more wary of how you're attacking in those games. Because like in Symphonia, Abyss, and Vesperia, when you're playing offensively, you just go attack and stuff, just block, like, and then just run away or block after your attack chain is gone. But like which is fine. Those games are designed like that, and they're fun like that. But Grace's F, Vesperia, you do have to keep track of how much resource you can. It's just so maybe you want to have enough resource to backstab after doing this combo and stuff like that. And like there's also Xillia and Xillia 2, which uses an interesting AC system where all like the amount of attacks you can do is determined by the AC system, which allows you to do a variety of things in order to do a cool combos like attack or art. And then there's an entire art system order, which is different which can be different in each Tales game, which changes how you play. Like in Symphonia, there's a level 1, level 2, level 3 tier combo system. Why in Abyss there's like an arcane base and arcane art tier system, with you getting more stuff to do, depending on the capacity core skills you get. At Vesperia, there's like base art, arcane art, and then there's like ultra dark, beta arts, and stuff like that. And then Grace's F, there's like the A arts and B arts system where it changes how you chain attacks again. Like real-time combat system, like there are a lot of ways to make each combat feel different, even with games that are in the same series.
Yeah, like I mean, like for example, like we're talking about Tales a lot, but like some of them they all have similarities, but especially the later ones, they are like very different from the previous ones. Like Tales of Arise, for example, is like has a vastly different combat system from most of the past Tales.
That game has a specific art or archery if you're attacking enemy in the air, which is really different from the past Tales games, where you basically like your art placement and within your controller is like very static from the ground to air. They just try to do attacks are more suited you in the air, tied to a button you already have on the ground and stuff like that.
Yeah, so the face buttons change completely depending on whether you're on the ground or airborne, and you know you can create a variety of really cool, really interesting combos.
But like I'm just saying, talking about Tales, but I think like are other interesting action RPG combat systems out there too. Like I haven't really played much of Star Ocean, but I think Star Ocean is interesting. At least Star Ocean 4.
I think Star Ocean 4 has the best combat out of all of them. I really like how you can map special attacks to the shoulder buttons, and depending on the order you put them in, it'll play out in that combination, and you can like alter between L2 and R2. And certain attacks, they could like lift enemies up in the air. Then you can like, if you're playing as Edge, you could hit them in the air, then when they're falling down, kick them back in the air, and then like attack them while they're airborne. You could do a lot of really interesting combos in that series too. I think that Star Ocean 4's combat is definitely nowhere near as deep or sophisticated as most of the Tales combat, but it is very enjoyable with the amount of options you have at your disposal with your characters.
I do think its movement system via blind spotting enemies does feel satisfying to do.
Yeah, the blind side is definitely one of the coolest features of Star Ocean 4. Yeah. Like, they could be a little tricky to pull off, especially when combat is chaotic, but once you time it and you rush around the enemy, it is very satisfying, and then you can just wail on them and stun them. It's great. It's a great time.
Yeah, and that's like I said. And then there are action combat systems with totally different movement systems that make you play them differently as well. So, like, there's like a lot of stuff that can make an action RPG combat system feel very unique and even very strategic in how you play them, I think.
Yeah, and Tales, Star Ocean, those are all like perfect examples. I think another one that I know it got a little bit of a mixed reception, but I think it's more positive, and even though I think it's not perfect, I think it's still really good, is I really did enjoy the combat of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I really liked that combination of an ATB system and menu-based combat, where like once you open the menu, time slows down to a crawl, and you can kind of manually pick all your abilities, and then you can map the different abilities to the face buttons, and then create really interesting combos. And another thing too is every character is vastly different from the other. Like every other action RPG we talked about, but like, for example, Cloud and Tifa play nowhere near alike as each other. They all have their own strengths and weaknesses. And I think it's that combat, it's not the deepest action combat I've seen, but it does offer a good amount of strategy, especially kind of with that semi-mixture of turn-based. Like I said, you can open the command menu and slow down time to a crawl and just take your time and pick different things, like whether it be your items, your magic, etc. It's a good time. I really think it's a pretty solid action combat system.
I guess the only thing left to talk about, since we talked about turn-based combat and real-time combat and what we liked about them, and like our opinions on the preconception of them, at least by like JRPG fans. Do you have a preference between a turn-based combat system or real-time combat system, I think?
Honestly, for me, I actually thought about it before we jumped on because I was really like trying to think about it. At the end of the day, I think for me, I don't know if I have a preference, just as long as the game is mechanically interesting and fun for its respective type. As long as like I love a combat of like Persona 5, Shadow Hearts, Covenant, Trails of Cold Steel, just as much as I love like Xillia 2 or Star Ocean 4. just because they all do their those respective combat systems extremely well. So at the end of the day, I think that as long as it's mechanically interesting, and I can be like creative with it, and it requires some sort of thought or strategy, I personally don't know if I really have a preference. I think I can go either way.
I guess I'm the same. Like, I probably do, like, I might prefer real-time combat systems more, but like it's pretty close, I think. Like I had a lot of fun playing through Persona 5 Royal, playing through Persona 3 when it first came out. Like, I also really like some of the more experimental turn-based combat systems. Like, Arc the Lad was a pretty interesting turn-based combat system.
Yeah, Arc the Lad was interesting. It was like kind of like a pseudo strategy RPG kinda, and yeah, it was good.
Yeah, but I also really love action RPG combat system too, especially if it's done well. Like, I think Tales is like one of the best action RPG combat systems out there in terms of how it balances action mechanics with RPG mechanics, as well as how it manages to still make interesting characters to play through as, either as party members or you playing as them themselves. Especially now, where they try to make each character have a specific skill that they bring to the table that you can activate as the party member. But
yeah, so I think that there's like they both have their pros. I think that I think they both have their own appeals, and as long as they're done well.
I would say, like, they can be boring too if it's done badly. In terms, like, if there's like really nothing to do besides just spamming attack and then just healing when you're low on HP, then yeah, they can be boring. That's just like regarding how the combat system is executed, and rather than the inherent flaws of a turn-based or real-time combat system.
Yeah, that just boils down to like kind of weak execution. Not that there's anything fundamentally flawed about a turn-based or action.
I mean, like each combat system do have their unique perks to them that you can enjoy. Like, I do like how you can control every party member in turn-based combat system and try to plan out your attacks to like basically decimate the enemies. I do like how like with the game that have turn order, that you are constantly trying to manipulate the turn order in your favor. I think that is fun, and that's not something you can really do in the action combat system. At the same time, there's also things in the action combat system that you can't do in the real-time combat system, like the ability to do like all these intricate combos in the real-time action combat system in real time, and being able to like balance out all these complex mechanics that the game has in real time, like thinking of what type of attack you want, how much TP or resource management you have, what is the enemy doing at this exact same time, should I dodge it, should I not, should I block instead, should I use this specific game mechanic right now in order to turn the tides in my favor, or save it for later. And this is all done in real time, which makes it really interesting to do, and really thrilling and just really fun to do.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like these action RPGs don't get nearly as much credit for how much thought has to go into your you know how you play out the battle. There's just way more to it than people give credit for.
Yeah.
But like for example, in a turn-based RPG, if for example if you're fighting a boss and then it's about to do something, chances are just all you can really do is like this click the defend command. Whereas in an action RPG, you've gotta like, oh, should I run away? Can I run to this spot? Is the boss gonna get me no matter where I go? What do I do? And you know, there's definitely thought that has to go into it for sure.
Like, there's not really much of an intricate movement system in a good amount of turn-based RPGs, unless you're counting strategy RPGs.
Yeah,
like
otherwise, for like
I separate traditional turn-based combat system to like actual strategy RPG system, like in Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics and stuff like that.
Yeah, those are kind of their own beast entirely.
I do think, like, defensively, I do think there's much more interesting thing to do in an action RPG combat system that's more interesting in that regard. Just because like there are like in a good amount of action RPG combat systems, there are interesting defensive movement mechanics to contend with. Just like, can you run away from this? Can I sidestep this and perfect guard it? Or can I like perfect dodge this so I can just avoid attack and keep my offense going? Stuff like that, which you don't really usually see in a turn-based combat system. But at the end of the day, like both combat systems have their strengths and weaknesses, I think.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it really just boils down to the execution, and you know, as long as it's mechanically interesting, at least there's a nuance to it, and there requires some
like as
thought
long
or
as
strategy.
have a satisfying, interesting game plan around it, I'm game to play it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way I can describe it.
But yeah, I think that's. Is there anything else to talk about regarding this subject?
I don't think so. I think we kind of said our piece, so I don't have anything else to add.
Oh, this is all for today's episode, I guess. Well, this is Cyrus from Sirus Gaming Spot, signing off.
Thanks, everyone.